Hey, my name is Zoe, starting off our presentation on increasing step count. For our presentation, I was in charge of the abstract, IOA data, as well as the graphs and tables.
My name is Betsy, and I will be talking about the design, the baseline, and the intervention phases of our replication project.
Sorry, my name is Ellen, and I was in charge of finding an article for the literature review as well as composing the literature review.
Hi, my name is Sean. I was responsible for our conclusion, and I will also talk briefly about our results. And I will also talk about the limitations of our study.
Hi, I'm the participant section, the settings section, the behavior definition, and treatment integrity.
Okay, so the study our group chose to replicate measured how effective low-cost interventions to increase physical activity are needed to treat and prevent obesity. In the study, we tracked adults or fit step trackers for a total of 3 weeks. During the baseline phase, subjects were able to read the Fitbit. Child schedules were used to determine draw criteria.
So you're breaking up way too much. We're gonna have to. We can't hear you at all. We're gonna have to start this over.
Wait, should we just keep it going just to get through it?
Yeah, let's just do it. Just to see for the length. Okay.
This is gonna be the one we turn in, but just see how it flows.
Yeah, okay. That's good.
Okay. I don't do because I got this up. I don't know what. All right. So participant individual criteria while in the intervention phase. The final week was a return to baseline phase. 4 participants in the study increased steps as a result of the intervention. Also, 1 participant in our group started his intervention phase after 5 because baseline data was stable. The purpose of the study was to evaluate the effectiveness of randomized reinforcement median period to use a analysis to characterize the structure of behavior change. The results from the study we'll discuss later.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the articles that we covered in the literature review. So obesity is a major public health problem in the United States and other developed countries. In the US, 65.7% of adults are overweight and 30.6% are considered to be obese. A study by Musto, Jacobs, Nash, Del Rossi, and Perry talked about metabolic syndrome. This affects 27% of adults in the United States, and it basically involves the presence of cardiovascular and metabolic risk factors that can include abdominal obesity, elevated blood pressure, and elevated fasting glucose. So due to the fact that physical inactivity is now the 4th leading risk factor for mortality worldwide, it's important to find a cost-effective way for people to increase their activity level. So it's recommended by the American College of Sports and Medicine to engage in at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity cardio at least 5 days a week. And a study by Andrade talked about the fact that walking is an exercise that is easily accessible and convenient. In the study by Musto et al., they used a longitudinal quasi-experimental group design that was conducted in 3 phases. So it was a baseline testing phase, a 12-week worksite pedometer program, and then there was a post-testing phase. After the post-testing phase, the women that were involved in the study were categorized into an active or control group based on the amount that their steps improved during the intervention phase. And the purpose of this study was to examine the effects of a progressive increase in steps per day on these metabolic syndrome components that I talked about earlier. The intervention phase of the study involved observing overweight sedentary women that were involved in a worksite pedometer program that used gradual weekly progression towards a step goal of 10,000 steps per day. Each person received a pedometer, a guide that provided details of the program, a daily step log, and an education booklet. During the baseline phase of this research study, the women wore their pedometer during waking hours and they just continued activity as normal. They self-reported their steps, and then the subsequent week's step goals were calculated by a database application. Once each participant had the step goal reach 10,000 a day, the progression was reduced to a 3% increase for the rest of the study. The results of this study included that the active group showed significant within-group improvements in fasting glucose and weight circumference. In addition, significant differences were found in resting heart rate and BMI. So this study suggests that incrementally increasing steps per day is a viable starting point to reduce health risk factors associated with metabolic syndrome. Another study that we looked at by Schneider et al. In 2006 studied the effects of a 10,000 steps per day goal on body weight, body composition, resting blood pressure, and fasting lipid profile among overweight and obese adults. So this study used a single group repeated measures experimental design. It was 36 weeks long. It started off with a 2-week baseline period where participants wore the pedometer and didn't change their current walking behavior. And then during intervention, participants were given a physical activity goal that progressed towards walking 10,000 steps per day. The results of this study showed that the participants that completed it showed significant improvements in body weight, BMI, percent body fat, fat mass, waist circumference, and hip circumference. So, the articles that we looked at so far demonstrated the fact that 1, obesity is a major public health problem, and 2, increasing the number of steps taken each day can significantly improve the risks that are related to being overweight. So it is of interest to figure out an effective way of getting individuals to take more steps and increase their activity level. Multiple studies have been done concerning how to establish and maintain high activity levels in adults. According to Burke, Wang, and Speck in their 2011 article in the Journal of the American Dietetic Association, a systematic review of literature on the 3 components of self-monitoring and behavioral weight loss studies that looked at diet, exercise, and self-weighing. So there was a significant association between self-monitoring and weight loss. So this does show that participants self-monitoring and self-reporting steps is an effective way to complete this intervention. Looking at our independent variable, there was a study done by Gitsa, Epstein, Schmittner, Vahabzadeh, and Ling in 2008, and that looked at price-based contingency management, which is what the study that we replicated used. They looked at that and its effect on cocaine and heroin abstinence. The study looked to determine the optimal reinforcement schedule to increase the likelihood of people abstaining from cocaine and heroin. So the article looked at the effects of both the probability of winning a prize as well as the size of the prize. They found that a higher probability of winning, but not the size of each prize, was associated with a greater percentage of cocaine negative, but not heroin negative urine samples. Andrade et al. Looked to evaluate a reinforcement thinning schedule to maintain high activity levels because of the fact that it's not reasonable for people to continually, weekly receive prizes for increasing their steps. You need to eventually thin that reinforcement schedule. The study found that monitoring plus reinforcement thinning maintained high rates of walking when it was in effect. However, after it was ceased, this group did not differ from the monitor-only condition group. However, this suggests that monitoring plus reinforcement thinning may be a low-cost way to at least extend the benefits of reinforcement interventions. So the study that we chose to replicate measured how effective low-cost interventions to increase physical activity are needed to treat and prevent obesity. So there are, I think everyone knows that there are health benefits to increasing your physical activity, but they are not immediate, they are delayed. So in the immediate time, there are more punishers that occur naturally, such as being tired, being sore, being out of breath, that kind of thing. So in order to kind of combat these punishers and the fact that the natural occurring reinforcers are delayed, it's important to figure out low-cost interventions to increase physical activity. So in a study by Washington, Bana, and Gibson, there were 11 healthy adults that wore Fitbit accelerometers for 3 weeks. During the initial baseline phase, subjects were able to receive prize draws for wearing the Fitbit. Percentage schedules were used to determine individual prize draw criteria that was going to happen while in the intervention phase. And then the final week was a return to baseline. 4 participants in the study did increase step counts as a result of the intervention. There are many benefits to using contingency management procedures to increase step counts. First, it requires an objective measurement. So it increases the probability that the appropriate behavior is being reinforced as opposed to reinforcing self-report. So there's actual data that's being taken on the Fitbit. In this particular study, the gradual shaping of increased physical activity occurred instead of a large shift in behavior. So that was more likely to be sustained. And then finally, it provides relatively frequent reinforcement of desired behavior. And then this, I didn't realize that I'd stuck this in here and I already talked about it. So I'm going to skip that and I'll leave it where it is. But with this being the case, prize-based contingency management is effective and useful in reinforcing increased physical activity, which in turn, I guess dying of boredom, which in turn improves overall health of the participant. Woo! Okay. That's it.
All right. Great literature review, Ellen.
Thank you.
Okay, so the participants that we have in our replication study are all students of the Ball State University course SPCE 611, section 807. There were 5 participants, 5 women and 1 man, and they're all between the ages of 28 and 36. So our subjects are Tisa, she was 33, Betsy, she was 29, Ellen, she was 36.
I hate you.
John, he was 29, and Anna, she's 28. The participants have all agreed to be the subjects of the current study, as they are all interested in increasing their exercise level. They are not pregnant, and they are all aware of any reason to avoid physical activities. These were also the requirements for the participants in the original study. All of the participants read through the Washington, Bana, and Gibson 2014 article, and they were made aware that this was a replication study. And the setting of the replication study took place in each participant's hometown in Indiana. The study began on June 3rd, 2017, or I'm sorry, 2018. Thanks, Betsy. And was collected for the following 21 days, and data was collected for the following 21 days. So baseline 1 would ideally go from June 3rd to June 9th. Intervention phase would ideally go from June 10th to the 16th, and baseline 2 phase would ideally go from June 17th to the 23rd. However, one of our participants, Sean, was required to remain in baseline 1 until his data was stable enough to move to the intervention phase. Is that correct? Did I say that correctly? Let me know if that's
No, it's the opposite. It's the intervention is
okay.
I moved to baseline sooner because my data was stable, and then my
Okay.
intervention phase was longer.
Okay, I'll fix that.
Okay.
All right, all of the participants had data, stable data for their first week, and were able to move it to intervention and baseline 2 as desired. I'll fix that too. Participants used the internet and their cellular phones as a meeting space to check in, to submit their data, and to obtain inter-observer agreement data, as well as ensure treatment integrity. So our behavior definition says a step is defined as picking up a foot, moving it forward, and setting it down in a manner that propels the individual forward when they're in a vertical position. So non-examples would include shaking or jiggling feet when in a seated position. And the behavior was measured and the behavior that's being measured is step activity, which is the number of steps taken by an individual per day. The data that was taken was collected using frequency as measured by the participant's Fitbit step tracker. And now we have the design.
All right, so during our design, we used a reversal design. So we used it to measure steps taken before an intervention, during an intervention, and after an intervention. We had baseline, intervention, baseline. During our first baseline, participants texted a picture of their Fitbit devices to group text by 11:59, and each person received a daily prize this week for just wearing the Fitbit. During the treatment phase, participants ranked each of the days in baseline from 1 to 7, 1 being the lowest and 7 being the highest in number of steps. In order to qualify for a prize during the treatment phase, the participant needed to gain more steps for, I changed that. For a set number of days, which we determined using a percentile schedule of reinforcement. Each day that the participants were successful in exceeding their steps from the week prior, they received a ticket. If a participant didn't exceed their steps, they did not receive a ticket or prize and continued to work towards earning a prize and increasing their steps. Again, during this phase, participants sent a picture of their Fitbit tracker to a group text by 11:59 p.m. The prizes that were earned were various throughout the phase. 50% of the tickets that were given were verbal praise, and the other 50% were bigger prizes, such as gift cards to different types of coffee shops. Since participants were in different cities, one participant had the prize bowl and drew the tickets for all the participants. They received varying amount of tickets depending on how often they met the step criteria from their previous week. And prizes were drawn at the end of the week from a bowl, and the prizes received, or the participants received the reward either through a live chat for verbal praise or email for the monetary gift cards. The second baseline was similar to the first baseline. We all wore a Fitbit tracker and received prizes for just wearing the tracker. We sent pictures of our Fitbit to a group text by 11:59 p.m. And once baseline 2 was finished, we created graphs to show which phase our steps were the highest in. Now it's
For agreement,
yeah, it's your. Go ahead.
sorry.
No, you're fine.
For and during all participants IOA and sending it to our group text message at 11:59 p.m. every night. Also, each group accepted a daily step challenge. Every morning by 10 a.m., all members are required to sync their steps to ensure the picture is accurate. IOA was calculated using total count IOA, in which the smaller frequency divided by the larger count, and then multiplied by 100 to find the IOA percentage. 100% all across all.
Okay, I think Tisa's done. Oh, okay. So then for treatment integrity, to ensure that treatment integrity was achieved, the participants held each other accountable for sending pictures to the group text message each day. If one participant did not share their picture, the first person to submit a picture today or for the day was to send a text message to that person who hadn't to remind them. So every participant read through a copy of the procedures section in order to understand proper implementation of the baseline and intervention phases. The participants also held each other accountable for receiving and redeeming a ticket for each day that met prize bowl criteria. The use of IOA also ensured treatment fidelity in that each participant was held accountable from the other group members to adhere to the procedures each day. The daily challenge was also used to ensure treatment fidelity, as participants could verify each other's steps through the Fitbit app. All right, and now we will show you our results in our individual graphs and talk about our graphs and limitations, starting with Tisa. Oh, sorry, I have to do that. Wait, let me get it up first, hold on.
Okay, so baseline 1, my was 6,979 steps. During my intervention, my steps were 11,185. For base 2, the average was 8,706. The range for baseline 1 was 6,544 to 7,754. During my intervention phase, range was 10,122 to 12,541. And then for baseline 2, my range was 8,256 to 9,213. For baseline 1, my data set shows slightly increasing trend at a moderate level. For my intervention phase, the intervention data set shows an increasing trend at a high level. And baseline 2 shows slightly increasing trend and again at a moderate level. Across all phases, the data was stable. And then, so talking about some of our limitations, a couple of my personal limitations that I encountered during our replication was that I have a 7-week-old son. So whether or not he was feeling up to walking around or just sitting, that kind of messed with my data a little bit. Also, I have 2 older kids who are on summer break, and the weather, kind of whether or not that was good, whether we could go outside or go for a walk or go to the zoo, affected my step count. But luckily, I was able to keep increasing my steps during the intervention phase.
Okay. And now we will have Betsy talk about her graph, right?
Yep.
All right, so as you can see, there was really not much of a trend for any of my phases. During my intervention phase, I had a family emergency come up, so I had I was sitting in a hospital, so there wasn't much room for improvement in steps. My averages were during baseline 1 was 7,178. During intervention, my average was 6,773. During baseline 2, my average was 7,102. And my ranges were for baseline 1, 6,576 to 7,898. For the intervention range, my range was 5,869 to 7,762. And then my baseline 2 range was 6,942 to 7,687.
Okay. We'll have Ellen talk about her graph.
So am I supposed to be able to see that on the screen? Because all I see is Sean.
All you see is Sean? Oh.
Okay,
no,
now I
it's
see
probably 'cause you're
Now I see it.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I still just see Sean.
Well,
Try to-
it's my screen that's all that matters really, because it's recording off of my screen, so I see your steps, but are you clicked on Sean?
Okay. It's fine. Okay. So for my baseline phase, I was pretty stable across all of the points. And then during the intervention phase, my daily steps did increase. It was a gradual increasing trend throughout the week. And then in the return to baseline, my steps decreased down to back about where they were before the intervention. So my results showed that during the baseline 1, my average step count was 10,572. In the intervention, it was 14,609. And then the return to baseline, it was a little higher than the original baseline, 10,993. So my range for baseline 1 was 9,982 to 11,240. My range for the intervention ranged from 12,644 to 16,322. And then there was a larger range for baseline 2, which was 9,472 steps to 13,486 steps. So I think my limitation, the only limitation I can really think of is the fact that at my job, I now sit at a desk for part of the day, so it makes it hard to get steps during work hours. And then my ability to increase my steps after work, sometimes I'm doing other fitness related things that don't involve a lot of steps but involve weightlifting. So if I was doing one of those classes, I wasn't getting steps. I don't know if these are good limitations or not, guys. I'm kind of making this up right now.
That's fine. That's fine.
And those are my limitations.
All right. Now we will have Sean talk about his graph.
Okay, so my baseline 1 average was 8,516 steps. In that phase, I had pretty stable data with maybe a very slightly increasing trend, with really no causation behind that. My average for my intervention phase was 11,905, and there's a visibly increasing trend for that stage. My average for baseline 2 phase was 8,125. So you can kind of see that my baseline 2 average kind of went below my original baseline 1 average once the intervention was removed. So that kind of speaks a little ill of the generalization effects over time for this intervention, at least for me. Everyone else, aside from me, it looks like their baseline 2 average was higher, except for Betsy, than their baseline 1 phase. My range for baseline 1 was 7,000, ranged from 7,517 to 9,750, which is kind of high, like kind of a high range difference there. I also had a sort of a high range difference as well in my range for intervention. That was 10,142 steps to 13,019 steps. And then my range for baseline 2 was 7,863 to 8,903. So there was less of a difference in my baseline 2 range, even though my average was lower. And next is Anna. Anna.
If you call me Anna one more time.
Anna.
Okay, and here's my graph. So in my baseline 1, I had an average of 8,541 steps. In my intervention phase, I had an average of 11,557 steps. And in my baseline 2 phase, I had an average of 9,150 steps. The ranges for each of those, baseline 1, the range was 7,118 to 9,640. My intervention ranges were 10,415 to 13,669. In my baseline 2 range was 6,982 to 11,320. So an analysis of my graph. In baseline 1, there is a slight decreasing trend with a moderate level and moderate variability. In my intervention phase, the graph shows a slight decreasing trend with a high level and high variability. And in baseline 2 phase, there is a decreasing trend. The level goes from high to low, and there is moderate variability. I think I need to fix that. Okay, let's see. Some limitations. The main one for me was that I went on vacation during the baseline 1 phase. I forgot my charger for my Fitbit, so I had to use my phone for a step tracker instead of my Fitbit, and that just kind of has, in my experience, less accuracy than the Fitbit. A second limitation is that I do work in an office as well, so I don't get as much steps throughout the day as I would like to. And in my intervention phase, I had one really high day, and that was when I had a friend take me on a really long walk. So that's pretty out of the norm and could be seen as an extraneous variable. All right. And now Sean will talk about the overall results, I believe.
Hello. Our results were somewhat similar to the original study in that there was an overall average increase in the number of steps for participants in the intervention phase when compared to both baseline phases that was seen in the original study as well. One notable difference of our data for all participants was that there was much less variability to our data than compared to the original study. It's hard to say why they had so much variability in their data, since there could be numerous unknown variables that affected the participants' step count. It can also be assumed that the researchers of the original study were under time constraints of some sort, since many of their participants would move to the next intervention phase or the next baseline phase, despite the fact that their data was not stable, whereas ours was pretty stable across all phases for all participants. One similarity is that one of my group members saw a little change between baseline phases and the intervention phase. As she mentioned, this was mostly due to a family emergency that was unavoidable. However, the original study actually had 2 participants that somehow got fewer steps during the intervention phase than the first baseline phase, which thankfully we only had the 1 participant where that happened to. The original study also ran into, what are you smiling about, Anna? The original study also ran into more complications. Huh?
You're like, somehow they got less in intervention.
The original study also ran into more complications than what our group did. 2 of the participants in the original study were unable to complete it due to 1 participant simply dropping out without providing an explanation, and another participant unexpectedly lost her Fitbit and was therefore dismissed from the study. And 2 other subjects somehow had corrupted data that was downloaded from the Fitbit website, which unfortunately the authors didn't really elaborate on what they meant by this. And from my experience doing this replication project, data is usually uploaded to the Fitbit app or the website and not downloaded. So I'm not quite sure what they meant by that, but nonetheless, these individuals were removed from the original study results. Our group step average for baseline 1 overall was 8,357 steps, whereas the original study's baseline 1 average was 9,003 steps, so really not that far off from each other. Our intervention average was 11,206, whereas theirs was 11,606. So again, not that far off. Our baseline 2 phase average was 8,815, and their average steps were 9,184. So overall, I would say that the effects of our intervention did show generalization over time, even once the intervention had been resolved, since the baseline 2 average numbers were higher than baseline 1 phase. Aside from the first baseline phase, our averages were usually less than 500 steps of the original interventions data results. So I would say that we were able to replicate the study with a fair amount of accuracy. Unfortunately, the authors of the study did not give the exact amount of steps that each participant walked each day, and the graphs that they provided had used a very large scale, making it extremely difficult to tell exactly how many steps each member walked each day. So it was pretty much impossible to get an exact range of their steps in each phase. However, one can easily see that their numbers were slightly higher than ours across all phases. This could certainly be due to the fact that they use much more expensive reinforcers than what we did. The highest reinforcers that we could earn was a $5 gift card to Starbucks, whereas their lowest reinforcer, aside from verbal praise, was $5. I think their max reinforcer was like worth $125, even though there was only 1 of them. But I think that we could still definitely skew the results. Although our results were comparable to the original study, our replication of the study did have a few limitations. One big limitation was that we were not able to account for nearly as many extraneous variables that the original study did, such as factors that would have an effect on our step count. These variables included individuals' average bout length, or in other words, their step length. Also, each individual's active minutes wearing the Fitbit were not completely accurately accounted for. We did try to somewhat account for the active minutes each person wore their Fitbit every day by having each member send a picture of their daily step counts to the group at 11:59 p.m. However, we did not really keep track of when the step count would begin, but rather we would just simply put on our Fitbits whenever we woke up. So the limitation was that we ran into a few minor technical difficulties with our Fitbits. As Anna mentioned, she didn't have a charger at one point. I think she had battery issues, but we were able. Did I call you Anna again? Battery issues, but we were able to take care of these problems fairly quickly. However, there was assumedly some steps lost during those little discrepancies. Another limitation is that our group served as both the researchers as well as the participants, which could have created a bias in the results. Although using an objective measuring system such as a Fitbit helped to compensate for this. One last limitation was that our group did not actually have a physical meeting place. Therefore, each member was responsible for giving themselves their earned reinforcer, which was sort of based on an honor system. However, we tried to use friends and significant others to hold us accountable for our steps and the prizes that we earned. Although there was really nothing from stopping, each and every one of us from just obtaining the desired reinforcer if we wanted to. Overall, the intervention was successful at increasing our group's daily step average to over 10,000 steps during the intervention phase. And that is the end of our presentation. Thank you for watching.